Dash 840 CWs are in charge of loaded CSX ethanol train B789 as they roll through East Chicago, Indiana on the railroad's Bar subdivision on a warm August 2022 evening. Throughout this video, we'll follow numerous Dash 8s seeing the first few runs of their second service life on the Chicago, Fort Wayne, and Eastern Railroad. Before seeing the CF&E's updated roster, we'll take a look back to late 2022 into early 2023. While CSX purged a vast majority of their Dash 8 fleet in the mid-2010s, a few were retained as extra horsepower. It's now late September as one such example. CSX 7811 leads train M327 west toward the railroad's Bar Yard in Riverdale, Illinois from Grand Rapids. Like the 7779 we just saw, the 7811 was rebuilt and is now classed as a Dash 840 CWM. Pine Junction, two more Dash 8s, the CSX 7774 and 7916, are in charge of an extra eastbound manifest. Tacked onto the head end of the train is a work train with a full steel gang's worth of equipment destined for track work east of here on the CSX system. Flashing forward to March 2023, we catch another eastbound manifest tearing through East Chicago on the Bar subdivision. An unrebuilt Dash 8, the CSX 7886 is leading today's M566 to Cleveland, Ohio. few weeks later, we catch another train led by the 7886 in the form of an extremely short M327 from Grand Rapids. Note that the ditch lights of these Dash 8s are mounted substantially lower than those of later AC 4400s and GEVOs, and are perhaps the easiest spotting feature of these locomotives. Golden hour is upon North Hammond at Ash Street as CSX 7880 leads westbound train M201 toward Bar Yard, ducking under the Indiana Toll Road as well as the main line of the South Shore. Back at Pine Junction, another M201 comes out of a stop for cross-traffic behind CSX 7904 and 7882. Note that, despite being the rebuilt unit of the pair, the 7882 is looking more like it's being powered by an Alco 244 as opposed to an FDL. Precision scheduled railroading at its finest on this evening's M201. The last CSX Dash 8 I would catch would be in the late summer of 2023 along the rails of the Indiana Harbor Belt. On Willow Court and Hammond, job GA1 is entering Gibson Yard behind the very interesting pair of CSX Dash 840CW 7764 and BNSF 9859. The 9859 is an SD70 Max still wearing the railroad's H2 paint scheme. By the end of 2023, just about every remaining CSX Dash 8 we just saw had been put into storage. However, many of the aforementioned units that were purged years ago would soon find themselves back in the Chicagoland area. When we last followed the Chicago, Fort Wayne, and Eastern Railroad, they were in a state of transition, testing 3 newly acquired former BNSF Dash 9s. These units, which were sublettered for the Indiana and Ohio Railway, were in regular service on the CF&E between October 2023 and early January 2024. In late October, one such example, the IORY 4505, is in charge of the railroad's daily Fort Wayne to Chicago manifest road freight. The train is entering the IHB's Gibson Yard and will drop off a block of auto racks before continuing west. The Dash 9 era on the CF&E was quite brief, and the railroad would begin acquiring their own former CSX Dash 8s and pushing them into service soon after. We wouldn't catch back up with the CF&E for nearly 5 months. It's now early March 2024 and we're along the IHB main line at State Line, west of Gibson Yard. A westbound FWCH has just finished a set out at Gibson and is now continuing the rest of their short journey to the IHB's Blue Island Yard. Leading the train are 2 former CSX Dash 840CWs, the 7865 and 7819. We'll make a quick chase of the train to Dalton Junction. At Dalton, the train is now on the final approach to Blue Island Yard. 7865 is equipped with a Nathan K3HA air horn, a virtually non-existent feature on any CSX locomotive, new or old. Two days later, we've run into another CF&E train returning east on their main line at Gary with the same pair of Dash 8s. An unseasonably warm day in the high 70s has met a swift defeat to a quick-moving cold front, and a good amount of fog and gloom has enveloped the area. In 1998, the Logan Park Assembly of Christ Church had built well into the CSX right-of-way and was immediately told by the railroad to remove all of it. To this day, the church continues to provide a very interesting setting for some urban railroading through the heart of Gary. You may recall this location from my previous CF&E video. Two YN3 Dash 8s are in charge of a late running westbound as they roll over Deep River in Hobart. Today's train is a mix of autoracks and an empty unit sand train being returned to the Canadian Pacific. This service has since ended, and these sand trains to the Wheeling and Lake Erie are now moved between Chicago and Ohio by Norfolk Southern. Back at the Logan Park Church, a colorful lash-up of diesel power leads another westbound toward the IHB. CF&E continues to move very similar traffic levels as our last look, with Bunge, General Motors, and Steel Dynamics being among the largest shippers on the railroad. We catch one more train at the church, this time led by the CFE 4035 and 3415. The 4035 is the former CSX 7873 and, unlike the other Dash 8s we've seen, was almost immediately repainted into the bright Genesee Wyoming paint scheme. Just west of Tolliston Junction and Gary, we find a scene that might be confused with a dystopian movie set from RoboCop. Thankfully, there were no sightings of Clarence Boddicker or the like on Roosevelt Street this morning. The westbound CF&E has just departed home rails and is now traversing the rails of the CSX Porter branch. While on CSX property, CF&E movements almost always carry a Z538 train symbol for their short 4.5-mile run to IHB property. A loaded continuous welded rail train from SDI's Columbia City plant is on the headpin of today's westbound. Including the rail train on the head end, today's train is an impressive 119 cars. In true TRTR fashion, we'll follow the train west for a chase of the CF&E across IHB rails. At Gibson Junction, the CF&E is closing in on the east end of Gibson Yard. The train will thread its way through the yard and drop off the 30 auto racks on the rear of the train before continuing to Blue Island Yard with the remainder. The train crew will take a minute to work their way through the yard. We'll head over to Willow Court in the west end of Gibson to see the train again. In a past life, the CFE 7865 and CSX 44 may very well have moved a train together. The train will pull just far enough west that their auto racks are on the west end of Gibson Yard, make their cut, and be on their way. Today's train is long enough that the conductor will be driven up to the head end at Calumet Park Junction, where we'll get our final look at today's CF&E manifest. With their conductor on board, the train can continue the rest of their trip to Blue Island Yard. We're back at Cal Park to catch a much shorter westbound to Blue Island Yard. In stark contrast to the 119-car train we just followed, today's is only 25. A good amount of traffic on today's train originated from Bungie's large plant in Decatur, Indiana. The train continues west at Dalton. We'll hang out at Dalton for a few hours and await the train's return. With their work complete, the train returns east with the CFE 7822 in the lead. Today's engineer will show off the unit's beautiful K5LA as they pass. It's now August. Another day at Dalton finds a favorable signal for the westbound CF&E. Leading today's westbound is CFE 7872, another unit with a great horn in the form of an absolutely monstrous K5H. If you close your eyes, it almost feels as if we're along the BC Rail in the 1990s. Another welded rail train is on the head end of today's train, this time using a Herzog train set as opposed to SDI-owned CWRX equipment. We'll head back east to Tolleson and await the train's eastbound return. Nearly invisible tracks are the name of the game on the CF&E side of Tolleson Junction as the eastbound makes their way to Hobart to tie down for the evening. Just east of Gary and west of Hobart is the small community of Liverpool. CF&E trains can open up to 40-mile-an-hour running here, but must also tackle quite the grade getting up to it. We'll take an uncut look at this eastbound from the IHB as they get the train up to track speed. From here we'll flash forward to early 2025 to get a good glimpse at the completed new look for the Chicago, Fort Wayne, and Eastern. In late 2024, Genesee, Wyoming began rather quickly repainting the CF&E's new fleet of road power. Two of these units, what would become the 4032 and 4034, were repainted into a heritage paint scheme reminiscent to the old days of the Genesee in Wyoming. At Burr Street along the CSX Porter branch, a westbound Z538 is making their way to the IHB behind CFE 4032, which was the 7872 we saw earlier. In the distance is Ivanhoe Junction and IHB rails. This bone-chilling January Sunday was complemented almost perfectly by the unit's ghostly K5H. CFE 4034, the railroad's other Dash 8 wearing a heritage paint scheme, tears through downtown Hobart on a wet and rainy spring evening. The 4034 was the 7825. As was the usual in the original CF&E video, the railroad's lake siding is rarely used to tie down westbound trains anymore. This train will tie down on the main at County Line a little over a mile east of here. A westbound heads for Blue Island at Gibson Junction behind the CFE 4035. Although the train has a few auto racks on the end, this train will go straight to Blue Island Yard. One unit that was plagued with mechanical issues was the CSX 7892 and rarely ran on the CF&E while in CSX colors. When fixed, the locomotive was renumbered as CFE 4036 and now dons an attractive camouflage paint job honoring veterans and armed forces. Evening has fallen across northwest Indiana on this late October 2024 evening as the eastbound CF&E crosses the old J Main at Ivanhoe Junction. CFE 4037 was the 7826 and is in charge of this evening's train. At the time of recording, work was ongoing to replace and reconfigure the signal system at Ivanhoe Junction. The project has since been completed. At Tolleson Junction, CFE 4038 is in charge of a very large eastbound manifest to Fort Wayne. The 4038 is the former 7822 and still sports its nice K5LA. For a brief while in the spring of 2025, the CF&E stopped running trains in the Friday evening to Saturday time slot. Long Sunday eastbounds like this 110-car example resulted, and the railroad reverted back to running Chicago trains 7 days a week soon after. Like our look at the railroad in 2023, Steel Dynamics' large Columbia City steel plant continues to be a very large shipper on the railroad, often accounting for the majority of carloads to and from the IHB. All of these loaded scrap cars and empty flat cars are bound for the plant, which focuses on structural steel and rail production. Looking back, October 21st, 2023 would be the last time I'd catch an all-EMD consist on the CF&E. At Tolleson Junction, CF&E 3316 and EMD SD40 T-2 originally built for the Southern Pacific, as well as a Rapid City Pier and Eastern SD40-3, their 3481, are leading an early evening westbound on a very gloomy fall day. Both units now see regular service on the Genesee Wyoming's Toledo, Peoria, and Western Railroad not terribly far south of here across Illinois and Indiana. We'll lens a nearly identical scene a little over a year later with a more modern rendition of the Chicago, Fort Wayne, and Eastern. It's just a few days before Christmas 2024 as another westbound road train departs home rails and hops onto the CSX Porter branch as another C538. Love 'em or hate 'em, embrace or reject modernity, the CF&E's new Dash 8s have provided a totally new look to the railroad, a much more colorful but slightly more redundant one. In any regard, it's great to see these older Dash 8s earning their keep at a second home over 30 years after being built. And as always, thanks for watching.